everybody, Danielle Egnew here. Welcome to inPsight Radio, where you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. It's awesome to be with you on today's show, and do we have one chunky monkey for you? This is a big show today because we are covering some material that so many of you wanted to look into. We're looking at the HAARP array up in Alaska. Of course, that's the High Altitude Atmospheric Research Program, HAARP, the HAARP program. We're also looking at chemtrails. Are they real? Are they not real? What's going on? Do we just think they're real? Have we gone histrionic with this whole thing? And finally, we're going to get a chance to look at some secrets of Atlantis and Lemuria that have really affected our modern culture. And this is going to be a bit of a mind-boggler. I am in the middle of writing a book about Atlantis and Lemuria and what we think it is versus what it actually was, which is really kind of a cool deal, even for me to go over this information. But we're going to start today on inPsight Radio with the HAARP array. Now, for those of you that don't know what the HAARP array is, it's actually an antenna array that can be found up in Alaska, and there are 180 separate antennas between about 30 and 40 acres. It's a great big antenna array, a planar array, where many, many antennas are connected. And what it does is shoot high frequencies of sound up into the ionosphere, in the plasma of the ionosphere, supposedly trying to measure the variance in the plasma with the high frequency agitation. And why would they want to do that? Why would they want to measure plasma in the ionosphere around the planet of Earth? Well, they would want to do that because what they're looking at doing is supposedly finding a way for our cellular communication and our communications on the Earth to not be disturbed by solar storms. Now, why does the ionosphere factor in with that? Well, the ionosphere is a great big layer of Earth's atmosphere that's way high up. And we literally bounce communications off of the ionosphere to get around the curvature of the Earth, right? Because obviously the Earth is not flat. I know that shocks a few folks out there, but no, it's really not flat. It's round. And so for us to get communication signals from one side of the globe to the other, we are literally bouncing them or refracting them off of this high atmospheric ceiling and then down to another part of the Earth. So obviously, if there's a solar storm, if we're having geomagnetic storms, which can be really, really terrible in lighting up the ionosphere, and I've talked about coronal mass ejections before on the show. So when we've got that disturbance in the ionosphere and we're trying to bounce our cell phone signals off of that, that's where we receive bad cell service and we have cell breaches. So obviously, when the telecommunications industry is pocketing billions of dollars a year, they want to see if they can actually do something to predict or to protect those signals from those geomagnetic storms or those solar flares or coronal mass ejections, so their cell phone service is not disturbed. And plus, the United States military wanted, of course, to check into this issue because, don't you know, they're trying to shoot military communications around the world, and goodness, we could have a really bad solar flare and they wouldn't be able to communicate with each other anymore. Insert crickets. So this is what supposedly the HAARP array's job is to do, is to figure out how the plasma in the ionosphere reacts to agitation. So they're shooting all these high frequencies into a little bitty small patch of the ionosphere up there. Now, keep in mind that science is not even sure what plasma does up there. I kid you not. Science isn't even exactly sure what that plasma's function entirely is. They know it conducts electricity and they know it fluxes with our geomagnetic storms, but they're not even sure exactly what it's doing up there. So what do we do with it? We shoot high intensity frequency sound waves into it, because that's what we do with things that we don't know how to deal with, right? We just shoot sound waves into them. Kind of sounds a little inane to me. Now, there are a lot of schools of thought and people out there who believe that by shooting these high frequency beams up into the plasma of our ionosphere, that we are changing weather, that somehow those high frequency beams are changing the way that the ionosphere oscillates. And obviously, the ionosphere has a lot to do with our weather, a lot to do. If it heats up or it cools down, that's certainly going to handle weather patterns. It's going to handle wind patterns. So when you hear people say there's nothing we can do on Earth that would affect the weather, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. If we blew off a ton of nuclear weapons, literally, it would create so much dust in the atmosphere that it would inhibit the sun from reaching the Earth, and that would cool the Earth down, which is going to raise the condensation level close to the ground, which means that we're going to have more moisture, more precipitation, and it's going to rain. So we blot out the sun, and that automatically starts producing more clouds, and automatically we get more rain. So absolutely, people, yes, human beings absolutely can augment weather patterns. Maybe not for the best, but we can do it. We can do it. Is that what HAARP is trying to do? There's a lot of people that believe that the HAARP array is changing weather patterns. Well, now, I got to tell you, from a psychic perspective and from a scientific perspective, and from what I can tell talking to these angels and these off-worlders, we're having a little bitty effect with the HAARP array on the weather, yet that's not actually why they put that up there. That's not actually what they were trying to do by augmenting the plasma of the Earth. Because, the HAARP array up in Alaska isn't the only HAARP array. And remember, that means High Altitude Atmospheric Research Program. It's not the only HAARP array in the world. There's one down in Antarctica. There is a HAARP array built in Antarctica. There is a HAARP array built, I believe it's up either by France or Belgium in that area. There's one in Russia. These HAARP arrays are all over the place. So it's not just in one space in the world. It's not just in Alaska. Here in the United States, that's what we like to talk about, is the HAARP array in Alaska. It's changing the world. It is really important when we are looking into what these scientific creations are actually doing. I think it's really important to pay attention to not get histrionic about the fact that these arrays are completely eating the Earth. They're not healthy for the Earth, and we'll get into that, and we'll get into what the military was actually doing with them. However, it's important to note that the small patch of ionosphere where these sound waves get beamed into, okay, it's a little bitty patch up there. And if you think about the size of the ionosphere, I mean, tens of thousands of times more pressure is hitting the ionosphere from the sun's natural radiation, okay? So we're hitting this little bitty 30 to 40 acre patch with high frequency sound. And when you look at the whole ionosphere, I mean, it's getting hit with hundreds of times more of solar radiation and far more destructive chemicals and, well, we'll get to the chemicals in a minute, but far more destructive elements, okay, than just sound. And so could it augment the weather? Well, sure it could, because especially it would take turning on all of the HAARP arrays all around the world in a synchronized fashion. It would take doing that to actually get our weather to do something different. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I'll tell you what the governments were trying to do. And I say governments because we're not the only government that runs a HAARP array. Originally, the HAARP array was an ionospheric research center that was co-funded by the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Navy, and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. So I think the University of Alaska Fairbanks just kind of got thrown in there. So it didn't seem too weird that two branches of our military actually put this 30, 40 acre planar array up there and are shooting high beams of sound into the ionosphere. Hey, you of Alaska, Y'all want to come study some plasma movement up there? Because it seems awfully suspect that 2 branches of the military are funding this. And actually, the military funding for HAARP died in 2015, actually 14. And in 2015, they turned the entire array over to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. But what the heck were they doing with this thing up there? Well, it's been around for a while. And the purpose of these planar arrays exciting the ionosphere, though they're saying they're trying to figure out how the plasma works because we don't even know what it is, because we don't want our communications disturbed. What a wonderful story. I want to be the person in the military who gets to come up with the stories that cover stuff up. Because, man, these aren't very good cover stories. This is pretty sad. So we need somebody with a little more imagination. So somebody needs to take that job that can really spin a story that sounds realistic. Because it's the United States military. We have satellites that can read license plates, for God's sakes. And they're worried about a cell signal and some solar flares? I mean, really? Really? Come on. So when I've consulted the ethers, when I've looked into the mechanics of the HAARP array, what it does, it excites plasma. You know what else excites plasma? You know what else gets the ionosphere humming and just ignited and blown up like a Roman candle? UFOs going in and out of it. Because our off-worlders, our off-world cousins, use that ionosphere as a great big portal. I mean, they literally use it as a battery pack, a booster pack for their temporal travels. And they have to find soft spots in the ionosphere because they're literally coming through these dimensions and the ionosphere fluxes. So they use the plasma to travel through the plasma to get into these vortex portals so they can just pop up over the Sahara Desert and then bingo, they're popping up over someplace completely different in New Jersey. I mean, they're temporal travelers, they're dimensional travelers. So why would the military, 2 branches of the U.S. military, want to study plasma movement and the vibration of sound through them? Well, we all know that we have downed off-world craft that we have been reverse engineering since the 30s, since the 1930s. And predominantly the 40s and 50s, we really went buggy with it in the United States military. And there are other governments all over the world, Germany and France and Canada, all of these governments that have been looking into off-world technology for many different reasons. And what kills me about this is in 2009, in the middle of the HAARP program still being co-owned by the military, there was a very bizarre wormhole that began to open up in the Indian Ocean. It was a vortex. It was a wormhole. And you have to go through Russian military records to really find a good account of this because, of course, our American military records, you can find some people talking about it. Most of them have redacted what they've said, or it's very hard on our end to find this information, but it's out there. It's out there. There was a big anomaly, a vortex that was picked up on radar forming in the Indian Ocean. And the largest armada globally of naval vessels from many, many different countries headed over to that vortex point. It was huge. So the Russian Navy, the American Navy, the Indian Navy, the French Navy, I mean, everybody was converging on this one giant anomaly, this wormhole that was opening up in the Indian Ocean, because they had no idea what in the heck was going to come through it. No idea. Well, according to records, nothing came through it, but it was enough of a freak out, enough of a scare to send the largest naval response globally to any one spot on the earth ever, because it freaked out every single world government that noticed it. So shortly after that, we are really hitting the HAARP array hard. And what we're trying to do is figure out If we've got a HAARP array, say in Alaska, and we've got one in Russia, say we've got one up if you notice, Alaska and Russia, if you follow those longitude lines, those are very high land masses, okay? And they're up by the poles. You go, of course, obviously Antarctica, there happens to be a continent down there where you can put a HAARP array, and it's clear down to the South Pole. Well, why do we want these arrays closer to the magnetic centers of the planet, the North and the South Poles? Because when you're dealing with the ionosphere, the plasma is fairly equal all the way around. However, if you're dealing with vortex entries and vortex points, it is not equal. It is easier for off-world craft to come in through the electromagnetic centers of the Earth, the North and the South Poles, because of the heavy magnetic field there. They can augment that magnetic field and then use some of the plasma in the ionosphere to be able to come through our atmosphere and come through us dimensionally. That's easier for them. It's a big booster. It's a big bunch of energy with that North Pole and South Pole. So if we're trying to open up a vortex, think about this just a minute. Hang in there. I know this is awful sciencey, but we're talking about the HAARP array. If we're trying to open up vortex points on the Earth, we need to be able to somehow figure out how to trigger those big power centers in order to then figure out how to triangulate that to open up a vortex someplace. Because how wonderful would it be if I'm a crazed military sociopath to be able to open up a vortex and just have my entire armada of ships, perhaps, in the Indian Ocean, and then instantly open up a vortex and pow, I'm off the coast of Russia. There we go. I'm sitting right there. It's kind of hard to be off the coast of Russia, but, you can be off the coast of anywhere. I'm off the coast of Africa. I'm off the coast of... There you are, because you opened up a wormhole. So the American government was doing temporal research with how to augment the electromagnetic fields of the Earth by exciting certain plasma points, because that can also throw energy around. That's the same energy that interferes with our cell signals. Are you following me here? How do we open that from the North and South Pole and triangulate it to other HAARP arrays? How do we use this to create a world transportation system, mostly for military use? Well, we never did figure out how to do it, because obviously we're missing a few massively key components like, what does the plasma in the ionosphere even do, let alone not understanding dimensional or temporal travel on craft or on people. So they didn't get what they needed out of it, and the military turns it over to the University of Alaska in 2015. They say, we can't figure this out, we can't crack this code, and we're turning it over. Now, could the HAARP array affect weather patterns? Well, if it was consistently and constantly exciting one tiny spot in the ionosphere, that is going to change upper atmospheric wind patterns. And keeping in mind that that's not the only HAARP array in the world, okay? There's a lot of different HAARP arrays. There's a big one in Russia. So if we're shooting off these really high frequency sound beams, and we're not really sure how they affect the plasma, except we know it excites the plasma or disturbs the plasma. Well, we're not even sure what that means. We don't know what those domino effects of disturbing the plasma are. So could the HAARP array affect weather? Well, yes, it could. Yes, it could. Do we have it dialed in, as far as I can tell, looking through the ethers, consulting these off-worlders and these angels? Do we have the HAARP array dialed in well enough and understand the plasma system well enough to create a tornado somewhere where we don't want one with the HAARP array? No, we don't. However, we do have enough ignorance to noodle with that upper ionosphere, and it has changed weather currents when they have it on. Thing of it is, it only excites the plasma when it's on. So when you turn it off, then, the natural weather patterns then continue. And it's a little teeny spot up in that ionosphere that is actually agitating the weather patterns. So some other factors that go into this really weird high altitude atmospheric research program is that even though they're beaming this sound, and it's like a laser beam, I mean, they're shooting that sound straight up into the plasma. There are other factors. That's 40 or 30 acres of a column of very high frequency sound. So if birds are flying through that, I mean, that's going to disturb the navigation of any animal that's flying through the air that uses electromagnetic navigation, because that high frequency sound creates a false oscillation or a very high oscillation, which could be mistaken as magnetic north, for instance. So can that cause problems for wildlife? Well, yeah, it can. I mean, it's not a good idea to blast a ton of high frequency sound around when we don't really know what it's doing. So there are a couple of what I would call mistaken accidental whoopsies that the HAARP array has really caused. And we're going to get into what's been making the weather so weird. Part of that is there, again, does the HAARP array affect weather? Well, it can. Just keep in mind, because we need to be just a touch realistic as well as looking into what's out there. It's affecting a very tiny patch of this huge electromagnetic net that is built to withstand hundreds and thousands of times more pressure from space. So our little, isn't going to make too much difference except for in the lower atmosphere. If we turn them all on at one time and had them all operating at once, that could, in fact, change, I don't want to say weather patterns, but wind patterns. And those wind patterns could then change the weather patterns. So if they figured out a way to, really coordinate all that with Mother Nature, that's outstanding. Yet I'm not quite seeing they've got it down to that much of a science. Yet it has created just strange, odd storms, I would say accidentally, when Mother Nature butts up against us messing with that particular ionospheric spot. Now, I will tell you what the HAARP array actually has caused, more so than weird weather, is earthquakes. When we excite the ionosphere like that and that plasma moves, it puts off all kinds of different discharges. And it's important to note that in this ionospheric research center, there is something called a fluxgate magnetometer. I love that. The fluxgate magnetometer. How do we defeat the Joker, Batman? Get the fluxgate magnetometer. Anyway, it's called a fluxgate magnetometer. And it belongs to the University of Alaska Fairbanks Geophysical Institute. Okay? Geophysical Institute. And it's this very interesting, it's a device that's up as part of the HAARP array. And it charts extramagnetic fields that will be coming from the sky or from the earth in case of a geomagnetic storm. But I think it's really interesting that it's coming from the Geophysical Institute and not the, astro whatever part of the University of Alaska Fairbanks, because the Geophysical Institute also deals with the plates of the earth. Okay, it deals with the geophysical. That is the earth. That's not sky and space, an atmospheric research center. That's the earth. So at the HAARP facility is this fluxgate magnetometer that measures the geomagnetic activity and how much of the magnetic field in the earth and the sky are being messed with when they turn on HAARP. So there have been all sorts of earthquakes that have been documented up in the Fairbanks area, all over the place, Iran, Iraq, weird, out-of-place earthquakes that have happened when these HAARP arrays actually are activated. Because what we're doing when we move the plasma is that also that sound is going up, yet that sound is also, it's a high frequency, so it's a high vibration. So you have 30 to 40 acres of this incredibly high frequency or high vibration, and that vibrates, yes, it's being shot into the air, but that vibrates that 30 or 40 acres that it sits on. And when we're dealing with the plasma, Okay. Who knows what the plasma is doing, but it's pushing geomagnetic energy back down to the earth. And that geomagnetic energy is what can cause issues with cell phones, right? So they're exciting this plasma, and that plasma is pushing that geomagnetic down to the earth, and the earth's crust responds by having an earthquake. That's why the University of Alaska at Fairbanks stuck a Fluxgate magnetometer. The Geophysical Institute of that university placed that there because they are tracking this particular type of anomaly that's happening there. Not the astrophysics lab, but the Geophysical Institute. So yes, earthquakes, yes. Weather somewhat accidentally by changing wind patterns. We do not have enough of an excited array to actually cause, again, hurricanes, or we just don't have a command yet of how the plasma of the earth works to be able to create that. So again, not suggesting that there is no atmospheric disturbance. There absolutely is with the wind, and the wind can definitely make things worse, especially if you've got weather patterns that are whooping up a batch. Yet we do not have HAARP dialed in enough scientifically to control the weather. And we certainly could not open up vortex portals with it, yet it does cause some pretty wicked earthquakes so far. So I'm sure they're probably still trying to figure out how they can control Mother Nature, yet that's really beyond our pay grade, way beyond our pay grade. And the more we noodle with it, the more horrible things end up happening, like, earthquakes. That's just unbelievable to me, what we think we can do with the weather. Getting to weather, we do have chemtrails. And, the whole chemtrail thing, there's folks who work in my field to get really upset because I just don't get right on board with, oh my God, the United States government is trying to, powder the world and turn us all into zombies. I gotta tell you, gang, that's just not what I'm pulling. I pull energies out of all particles all over the place. And I am not pulling any sort of particle out of these chemtrails. First of all, they can't control them. So those are being blown so high up in the atmosphere that, let's just take HAARP, for instance. We start getting those HAARP wind changes in there, and we can't control where those winds would take toxic dumps of chemicals. What we do try to do is cause rain. We are constantly either trying to cause rain or we are taking rain away. And that goes clear back to World War II, where the British government was experimenting with seeding the clouds with salt and a silver derivative. And it worked so well that it flash flooded one of their towns and killed a bunch of people. And it wasn't until 2001, I believe, that the British government actually came forward and admitted to seeding those clouds and messing with weather. We mess with clouds all the time. And I'll get back to the chemtrails in a second. Yet we mess with the weather constantly. When I was living in Los Angeles, and I spent 11 years in LA, you got to remember that in that Los Angeles Valley, that one valley produces a predominant number of movies, film broadcasts, TV shows. They have a lot of outside shoots. The reason they chose Los Angeles is at the time, in the early 20s and 30s, the real estate actually out there was really, really inexpensive. And the weather was always sunny. It was always sunny. So if you were going to be shooting outside, which can be easier instead of shooting inside of a soundstage, which can cost a whole lot of money with lighting and with, they call it gaffers, with all the gaffing, it's easier just to shoot outside and have a pretty steady stream of sun because you can shade it or you can do what you're going to do with it. When I was in LA, I remember hearing these fighter jets that would just start screeching over the valley. I lived in Sherman Oaks, and these fighter jets would just be screeching over the valley back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And miraculously, they would only come around if there was a really, really thick cloud bank that would roll in, called the marine layer, because obviously LA is coastal, the valley is a bit inland, yet this marine layer would come in and just sit in like an inversion in the valley, and it would be super cloudy. which was really a nice break considering now in Los Angeles in November, it's 95 degrees, which is rough. So I asked someone, why are these jets only over the valley, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth when it's cloudy? And then why miraculously 45 minutes later did the clouds disappear? Well, if you think about it, in the valley, you've got the CBS studio lot, you've got the NBC lot. There's a lot of film and TV production that happen in the valley. A lot of TV shows being shot, a lot. And like I said, it's a very expensive industry. So if it gets cloudy and you have to cancel your shoot, well, that's literally hundreds of thousands of dollars a day that are being put off in not being able to film. So it's a lot more cost effective to just dissolve the clouds. And those fighter jets never came through that valley unless it was cloudy. And then miraculously, 45 minutes later, an hour later, holy cow, the clouds apart. Finally, I got somebody to talk to me who had lived there their whole life. And they said, oh, yeah, when they got to do film and TV production, they just call up Edwards up there and they send some planes down and they put chemicals in the clouds and dissolve them and we get the sun back. Well, I want you to think about that. Obviously, I don't think anybody's admitting to dissolving clouds, but they did. I'm telling you, that's exactly what happened. And they dissolved those clouds and ta-da. Of course, the official word from the Air Force Base down there was that they were just doing maneuvers and they would do fake bombing runs, which they would do over the valley all the time. Yet I found it miraculous they only did fake bombing runs during the cloudy times and then suddenly the clouds all dissolved. And yes, the marine layers do dissipate, but it usually not that fast and right after planes fly through them. So if we're looking at weather, we have been, and we're looking at chemtrails. The contrails that come out of those jets, obviously they're poofy and they can shade the earth, those contrails. And when they shade the earth, they cool the earth, and that can again cause condensation. What I have noticed is that I did notice that they were trying to get rid of certain chemicals that they can't really dump in the ocean and they can't really dump in the ground. And there were some heavy metals that were being dumped up there. I could detect those metals. And I had a friend of mine who is an atmospheric scientist that said, well, those metals too, they affect cloud formation. So I have not yet been able to detect them dumping toxins on us. Now, maybe they actually are dumping toxins on us. And if they're doing that, it's not the government. We have a bunch of really weird military-industrial complexes that operate independently of any world governments. And they're the ones that have literally taken all of the off-world technologies and basically stolen them to put us 100 years in the past in terms of energy production. But when we're looking at the chemtrails, we do have heavy metals that get dumped up there. And we do have some toxins that I have detected, and especially some weird, very high radioactive content that has been dumped around up there. Because once it's up there, it just blows around and around and around. I mean, that's way high up. When you see those contrails, they're way up there. There have been some experiments by different governments to create grids of contrails to try to reflect back some of the sunlight that's coming down and warming the earth. The problem with that is it then creates a heating effect, like a greenhouse effect down below the earth. So even though it's refracting the light, it creates a greenhouse effect. So that actually speeds up global warming or climate change. And this is where this gets really weird, because we do have a group of people that are incredibly sociopathic that run the money of the world. And when I say this stuff, you guys, remember, light always wins, love always wins, executing love in the world always wins. It doesn't mean there's not creepy McCreepers out there doing creeper McCreepy things, because there are people who just don't speak the language of love, and those people will continue to do their creepy McCreeper things. Like this group of people who run the world's money. You want to call them shadow government or secret government or the Illuminati or whatever. They're certainly not illuminated. They are groups of people that are trying to control resources and control money. And if we do keep our resources limited, we can control the populations. Now, if we create a chemtrail grid or a contrail grid, and we reflect sunlight back into space, but we create a greenhouse effect on the Earth, that heats the Earth up. And that does change the weather. We heat up the Earth, and therein we get humongous, monster, sci-fi channel style giant hurricanes and massive, massive tornadoes. Okay? So if you can imagine that we are dumping some weird stuff in the high atmosphere that we cannot dispose of on the ground, and that will cause things, especially this radioactive stuff that I'm picking up there, that's weird. And so that can cause flu-like symptoms. I'm not necessarily picking up that out of the atmosphere that they are dropping, bugs on people and trying to kill people. I honestly think that's a little bit histrionic. We are poisoning our food and our water enough. We don't need to go 50,000 feet up into the air and contrail it around. We are disposing of toxins that just continually blow around the world. I think that we're hoping are above the rain margin and won't come down. And we seem to have backed off on that even. And that seems to have been backed off, that I can detect anyway up there, in correlation with how freaky our weather has gotten. Do you really want to shoot a bunch of radioactive stuff up in this upper ionosphere area that we're literally, obviously we're not in the ionosphere, but in the upper atmosphere. And then we're exciting the upper ionosphere with plasma excitation, and we're moving the wind currents. We could have wind spikes. It's really ridiculous that we think that the planet is something that we can control. And there are people trying to control it. More so by using rain and clouds and heating the planet up, which creates super weather. That does create super weather. Now, are the governments doing this? No. We do have some freaky deaky, like I call them, weird private military industrial complexes that are attempting to utilize off-world technologies for their gain, okay? And by the way, just so you know this, I really want you all to hear this on inPsight Radio today. If any news broadcast ever puts out that we are being attacked by an off-world civilization or an alien civilization, that's just not true. That's us attacking us with reverse engineered technology, right down to freaky deaky looking beings, okay, that we have engineered. That is us. These off-world beautiful cultures have been coming to this planet for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. And believe me, if they were going to take us over, it would have been before we sprayed a bunch of aluminum and weird lead and bizarre radioactive chemicals high up into the atmosphere and poisoned the oceans. They would have taken it when the real estate was pure, okay? So if you ever see anything on the news about, oh my God, there's a giant ship over New York and it's killing people, that is us. That's called a false flag. That would never, ever be our off-world technologies. And it wouldn't be our off-world societies using those technologies against us. I don't know that we'll ever get there with using these technologies, but I have seen a few UFOs that were American-made. I can feel human beings driving them. And if they're round, they belong to the off-worlders. If they're triangular, they typically belong to us. If they're shaped like a Dorito, they belong to us. So it's just important to know. And it's bizarre how not military a lot of these vehicles actually are. And again, so we're talking about private industrial military complexes that have taken off with a lot of this stuff, and they noodle with it because they're the ones who would love to slap down world domination. Now, is it going to ever happen? No, it's not. World domination will not be achieved through darkness, evil, and the reverse engineering of off-world technology. But there's a lot of people putting billions of dollars into that, including but not limited to contrails and some chemtrails that are causing problems. The bigger issue that we have to worry about, honestly, is electrosmog. Really, all of this EMF in the air and the frequencies, the VLF through the ground, those are more realistic worries than the HAARP array or the chemtrails. And I know there are people who, and if you're one of those folks who truly believes that they're dropping, chemicals on us that are making us sick, I wouldn't be surprised by that. I'm just simply telling you that I am not pulling any deliberate attempt from any world government to deliberately poison people. I am pulling from these shadow weirdos, government people, the need to dispose of a lot of byproducts that are very toxic up in the upper atmosphere. And that could really be making people sick also. That could be making people sick. Yeah, I think what's even making people more sick is the fact that those reactors that melted down in, 2011, when Japan was moved 9 feet west by that giant tsunami. My God, I think that the nuclear reactors in Fukushima that are still melting, they're still melting. Hello, that's what a meltdown is. They are so hot, they just melt right down through the ground. They melt right down to the core of the earth. They just keep on melting. They're so hot. I think that's a bigger problem with underground aquifers and, oh my God, than probably chemtrails. However, like I said, love has it handled, light has it handled, and before it's all said and done, humanity, we have it handled, and we turn all of this around. And before I run out of time, I want to make sure that I have an opportunity to touch on Atlantis and Lemuria, because this is a great segue. And really, when we're talking about off-worlders, when we're talking about this incredible technology, when we're talking about oceans rising and we're talking about tidal waves, Atlantis, right? The mythical Atlantis. And we read these Greek writings about Atlantis being this mystery, beautiful island that appeared and then disappeared. So let me just give you the cliff notes, because this could be a 5-hour-long discussion about what Atlantis and Lemuria were. A long time ago, on a planet called Earth, before the continents actually had even risen, this planet was a big, sulfury, soupy water ball. And it wasn't until the planet started cooling a bit and the continents started to raise that we had landmass. I mean, it was all underwater. The whole thing, all of it, was underwater. They find fossils on the top of incredibly tall mountains. The whole thing was underwater. And the only reason I know this entire account of Atlantis and Lemuria is because it is a very well-known account, historical account, through our off-world communities. Atlantis and Lemuria was not some island that blew up with a volcano. These were humongous craft. I mean, huge. We're talking 200-300 miles across, and they were shaped like a donut. And they would land on a planet that was going to be developed for a later time, meaning life. They knew life was going to come here at some point because it had all of those ingredients within the oceans. And they were outpost installments that were temporal vessels. And I'm going to do my best just to give you the bullet points on this. Yet Atlantis, actually Lemuria got here first. Lemuria was here first. And Lemuria, we call it Lemuria. The way that they pronounce it, it sounds more like El Maru, but we call it Lemuria. And that outpost was a science installment. And I want you to imagine all of the social workers, the scientists, the social scientists, the climate scientists, all of those beings from many different star systems came down on this great big donut-shaped craft. And this is not uncommon. Apparently, this happens all over the known universe when they come upon a planet that they know is going to be heavily traversed. And here's the cool part about this. So you've got this donut-shaped ship. And in the middle of the ship was literally a huge temporal gateway. And within the middle of that ship, and they used, apparently, the Earth was, again, at that time also, just this huge spinning electromagnet. So they realized that the Earth was going to be an incredible jump point for all of these off-world races to come. And from what I understand of this whole entire account, on the inside of this big donut section of the ship, they could literally see into space-time. So they could see what the world was going to be like, who was going to be living here, what was going to be happening, how it was going to evolve. And they just kind of look into time because time is not on a line. Human beings, by the way, are the only race I've come across in all of these galaxies that actually think that time is on a line. It's hysterical. Okay. So these beings are looking at temporal events, which are, of course, the highest probability of action taken by all living matter. So they're looking at this and going, okay, well, we're going to have life that evolves here, and we're going to be using it as a jump point, and we're all going to kind of get along, and the life is going to come along at a slower pace. And actually, humanity has been wiped out over and over and over again by world events. And these off-worlders have not messed with that. They've just let that happen because that's part of our natural evolution of our planet. So Lemuria was looking at this going, okay, well, I think we're going to be able to probably, let life evolve here, and we can use it too as a jump point or a runway because this is a great planet with its electromagnetic properties so close to this huge, giant hydrogen ball, only 96 million miles away. There's an incredible opportunity here to use this as a temporal jump point from, point A to point B in the galaxy. It's going to work. Then here comes what we call Atlantis. And Atlantis, again, they have different names for these vessels or their purpose. But there's always the social vessel that comes out, and then we're the sciencey vessel. And this vessel is going to be testing the Earth's magnetic field. It's going to be testing the Earth's tensile strength as far as the crust versus the magnetosphere versus, all kinds of things. And so the science minds ends up on Atlantis. And Atlantis is shaped the same way. It's a big donut-shaped ship. And in the middle, they've got this temporal window where they too can see all this going on. And I will save you the whole story, which you can read about in the book once I get it finished. But just for the sake of time, I'll tell you that the folks on Atlantis really looked ahead, and it was good intentions that got in the way here. This is a classic story of great intentions that just went south. They looked through these temporal doorways, and they saw humanity dying from giant explosions and, volcanoes and plagues and all of this. So they say to Lemuria, and keep in mind, you've got one giant 200-300 mile wide craft floating on a shallow ocean in the northern hemisphere, and then directly across the globe, all the way through, if you drew a straight line all the way through on the southern hemisphere, you have the other giant, huge craft floating. And they would hook together, they would link together. And in part, that's how they ran these temporal doorways, is they had I don't even know how to explain it, but they were linked together energetically, and they helped power each other. And it took that much power to open up these temporal windows in the middle of these ships that they took a look at everything at. So Atlantis decides, well, now hold on, you guys. This is kind of a cool species, and it looks like we're going to be doing some gene splicing in a couple million years, a billion years anyway. And why don't we just get in there and help them along a little bit? Because the thing about these temporal doorways in the middle is you could come and go out of the middle of these suckers. I know this is sounding like a Star Trek episode, but just hang in there because this is actually what the Atlantean and the Lemurian lore was based off of this stuff. So when you hear about the Greeks talking about this floating island that would appear out in the clouds and then disappear, what they ended up doing is this Atlantean civilization was trying to prove to the Lemurian leg, hey, look, we can actually help these humans. We can kind of guide the evolution here and really help create a very kind species. And you got Lemuria over there going, hey, man, we're not God. Okay, we're just here to survey whether or not this will be a worthy jump point for multiple galaxies if life exists on it. Will it ruin the planet? Can we do it? Can we live here with the indigenous species? The answer is yes, we need to go. Then you got Atlantis over there going, well, but kind of pencil-necked and weak. And, maybe let's take this a step further. Maybe we could really work on some of their genome and we could help them out a little. So meaning well, Atlantis sent some of its folks through that temporal gateway. And those folks they interacted with our ancient cultures. So one of the most incredible examples of that is Manoah. We had this incredible, oh my God, Manoah was so ahead of its time. And for those that don't know what Manoah was, it was a civilization in the Mediterranean Sea that was just stunning. And one of the biggest issues about Manoah, which was such a jaw dropper, was it had this series of harbors that were built that were bafflements that controlled the tide. And it made these incredible tide breaks. And nobody had ever seen any technology like that before. It was pretty simple, yet it was pretty advanced for that day and age. And not to mention their water systems were advanced. Well, these folks from Atlantis went right over there and said, hey there, we'd like to help you out. We're going to show Lemuria that we can make a positive difference by showing you guys that here's how you can, fix this and blah, blah, blah. Well, the irony was that there were several civilizations that Atlantis tried to reach out to. And so when you hear about the Greeks saying, yeah, all of a sudden this weird floating island appeared in all this fog, and then it would disappear. Well, when they went through those temporal gateways, boom, all of a sudden you can see this giant, 200-mile wide floating thing out there, which is going to look like an island, shaped like a donut. And then kapow, when they're done with those temporal gateways, poof, it's closed. So then they go back billions of years past. I know, it sounds fake. I'm telling you guys, this is what happened. So here's the part that's interesting. Manoah was one of the classic examples that the Atlanteans actually came forward and really helped out with. And what the heck happened to Manoah? He got eaten by a tidal wave. Because the cardinal rule of space-time, gang, is that you cannot mess with the timeline. Not even if you're an advanced civilization. So how did Atlantis explode? What was that about? How did it sink? Well, it didn't really sink, it blew up. And it blew up because when they kept noodling with all these timelines in the future, which for us now are the past, and Atlantis and Lemuria were way in the past, we're talking billions of years in the past, when they noodled with that, they messed with the timelines. The Lemurians, they weren't Lemurians, they were actually folks from Sirius AB, from Latour, Palladian, they were from all over the place, but we call them Lemurians because that's what we do in humanity, we make up stuff. So here we've got this big craft, and it got, the folks on the Lemurian craft got furious at the Atlantean craft because they noodled with the space-time, they noodled with everything. And they said, if you guys don't stop this, we're going to uncouple from you and we're leaving. And Atlantis said, you're not going to uncouple from us, because if you uncouple from us before we uncouple from you, we'll be destroyed, and you'd never do that. And the Lemurian craft said, well, you are messing with things that you shouldn't be messing with on this world. You're too big for your britches. And these are huge bullet points. My God. Basically, this went back and forth, and Lemuria uncoupled from Atlantis before they uncoupled from them. And all of that power shot right back into Atlantis and blew it into gigantic smithereens. I mean, it vaporized that entire ship. And I mean, we're talking a ship that had thousands and thousands of off-world crew on it. And all these beings died. I mean, they just vaporized. A few of them actually got over to Lemuria before the whole thing blew, because they realized that other craft was pretty serious about them noodling with the timeline. However, when it blew, and this is what's so interesting, keep in mind, these were pretty shallow oceans, okay, covering the whole Earth. This is what I was talking about in the broadcast with the K2 stone. It vaporized, completely vaporized all of this particle matter. And I mean, we can't even wrap our brains around the type of it was a temporal explosion. It wasn't a nuclear explosion. It was a temporal explosion, which literally is time and space collapsing in on itself. So it dissolved molecules in a way that we can't even get our brain around. And the power was immense. And it blew all of these tiny particles down through the water, and it actually evaporated a whole section of water and blew that seawater with these tiny particles of metal and all kinds of things into the seabed, really deep into the seabed. And some of those individual portals on Atlantis, there were all kinds of pods that Atlantis had. And some of them got blown into the earth before Lemuria uncoupled. And I'll cover that on another show, these Atlantean pods that are still actually up now in what we call Russia, because then it was just sea bottom. But this K2 stone that I was talking about has those blue dots in it that are oxidized coppers and other metals they cannot actually identify that were blown into the granite. And that's what happened when Atlantis vaporized. It just flat vaporized. They've also pulled out of Russia. They found in Russia in 10,000 foot deep salt mines when they are carving through. They've actually found metal and shrapnel and pieces of electronic gear that are embedded in the stone 10,000 feet down. And they had no idea how those components had actually become embedded or one with the rock. And in some cases, the rock actually extruded, it went through the holes that were present in the metal. So literally, this shrapnel had been blown into what would have been at that time, I think, semi-molten rock, obviously not hot enough to melt it, yet they're not even sure what some of these alloys are. So pieces of Atlantis have come to surface in Russia. And you read about this stuff online, you see this incredible finds, and they're just dismissed. And I'm thinking, okay. Even if you don't believe in Atlantis, even if you don't believe a word I said today, even if you don't believe it's possible that off-world craft could have gotten into a disagreement and to maintain the balance on Earth, one left and the other one blew up, what in the heck are completely unidentifiable alloys doing embedded 10,000 feet down in the middle of stone in Russia? Just the stone just formed right around this stuff? I mean, come on. Did we accidentally have, was it the HAARP array? Were we trying to open a vortex point and we did a really bad job and we beamed a Volkswagen into the ground in a salt mine? I mean, I guess that's about as much control as we have over the vortex system of the Earth. Yet it's very important to note that the Earth has been used for hundreds of thousands, and I'll say it again, if not millions of years, as a commuter point for many, many off-world cultures. And many of those off-world cultures are still here. And they operate from beneath the oceans. They come and go because we don't know what's going on in the Mariana Trench. We can't get down there. What a better place to send a temporal jump point. Just come right through there. We don't know what's happening. Our submarines find all kinds of really weird underwater craft all the time that they don't know how to identify. And it outruns them silently. They have no idea what it is. It never fires on them. Again, gang, if you ever see anything on the news that says that aliens or off-worlders are coming for us, that's just not true. It's not true. Geez, the off-worlders that populated Lemuria were so upset that the ego of Atlantis actually wanted to control the flow of life here. And really, the reason that Atlantis wanted to do that at first, it was to help us out. The secondary part of that is that they realized that this was going to be a pretty hot piece of real estate in terms of being a jump point. And they wanted to make sure that the predominant species that was living there wasn't going to flip and wreck it. Well, they didn't do a very good job because we're just giving Mother Earth a run for her money with weird chemicals that were blowing up into the high stratosphere with jet contrails and by blowing high frequencies into the plasma of the ionosphere. And we don't even know what it does, but we know it's causing earthquakes. And this sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, gang. It really does. I mean, it sounds like conspiracy radio on inPsight. No, this is not conspiracy. It's what's going on. Now, keep in mind, in the middle of all this going on, we are raising the vibration of the earth by enacting love. And every minute that we get out there and we do something fabulous for another person, we clean up our community, we love on a family member, we bring something positive to the ethersphere in the internet, every time we do that, we create a resonation that this planet relates with. And the planet itself is a giant transmitter for love. This planet is love. We've got a few people running around with some pretty nasty attitudes, but the planet itself is made in the image of light. It is made in the image of creation. The planet is a very feminine energy. Look at Pele, the goddess in Hawaii, with all that lava coming up. It's a feminine energy. Even the energy of Kali. Everybody says, oh, she's the goddess that ruins things. She's destruction. Actually, she's the mother that brings destruction in order for the children to thrive. So our planet is a very feminine entity. And as well as the divine masculine wraps around love as well. Speaking in the feminine, the planet responds to love. So yes, do we have HAARP? Yes. Does it do some bad things? Yes, it does. Are there some chemicals up in the atmosphere? Yes. Or is it coming out of some of these airplanes? Well, yes. Are they going to try to poison everybody with it? Well, probably not. However, does it make some people sick? Yes. However, we heal this planet by loving one another. We heal this planet by not going into a fear consciousness around the idiotic works of a few sociopaths. I'm not afraid of this stuff. I talk to angels every day, and these angels tell me about this amazing exalted ability that the human species has to transcend any situation. And we are literally energy transmuters here. That's what we do. We take in energies from all sorts of other dimensions here on Earth, and we transmute that energy, and we make that energy into love. That's what we do. So no matter what's going on, we have two choices. We can either get all twisted up about, like I say, a few sociopathic idiots that think they can actually open up wormholes with high-frequency arrays in plasma. That just cracks me up, coming and going. Oh my God. Causing earthquakes, not knowing what they're doing. We can get really twisted up about that, or we can combat that ignorance with incredible education and with actions of great stewardship for our earth, stewardship for one another, and stewardship for our communities and our families. That literally creates an energetic resonation that literally trumps everything. High vibration in this third dimension, especially on Earth, wins. Love wins. So what I'm telling you today is, though it's super fun to look into HAARP and chemtrails and weather augmentation because it's happened and it's real, and it's fun to look at Atlantis and Lemuria because it's real. It's also interesting to look at Atlantis and Lemuria and recognize that every single civilization that Atlantis helped out was then destroyed by Mother Nature, because Mother Earth knew that was an out-of-sequence plan. And Mother Earth took care of it. Manoa was completely drowned by a catastrophic tidal wave from a part of an island that blew up that wasn't too far away. Because, well, let's just, face facts. The Mediterranean is a great big volcano hotspot. So love and balance and stewardship and caring, that's what gets us through all of this. So you stick with me and you keep the faith. We've got this handled, humanity. We've got this handled. Next week is going to be awesome. Speaking of love, I am bringing a guest in to talk to all of you. She's a dear, dear friend and colleague of mine. Her name is Marcia Culver Reichert. You can find her on iTunes with The House of Iora. We're going to be talking about healing through sound. She is a tonal healer and a renowned tonal healer. We're going to be talking all about how those gifts and abilities work, how you can channel them, what they actually do. We're also going to be talking about elementals, fairies, the fae. Who are they? Are you part elemental? And we're going to throw in some Bigfoot, because it's not a radio show without Bigfoot. That and tons more with Marcia in the studio. So join us next week for that. This week, you go forward and you resonate love into the ethers. That, humanity, is the singular energy signature, which is our deliverance. And we are masters at loving. You take care, and I'll see you next week.